Peterson and identity politics. Jordan Peterson has apparently won a well-deserved reputation for talking a lot of intelligent sense, and that's very good. And he talks a lot of sense on identity politics, for one, amongst other topics. However, there was one aspect that I feel that needs to be emphasized here, which he doesn't seem to, and that he just appears to react to and buy the feminist line that identity politics is relevant mainly to occupational issues, income, capital, promotions, the so-called glass ceiling, pay equity and so-called, and things like that. However, there are lots of other issues in society where it's relevant to talk about differences and similarities between men and women, which the feminists ignore, and that's one issue I would like to talk about. The other issue is in the real world, although one might like to say that identity politics is a bad idea and not a very practical way of approaching things, the fact is that identity politics is being used by the feminists, and men are being left behind because men are not in sufficient numbers or with sufficient intensity following up identity politics on issues which are important to them, or should be important to them, and which are certainly relevant to them in terms of their happiness and success and so forth in life generally, in many aspects of life, not just careers but also careers. Jordan Peterson appears to approach identity politics from the point of view that first of all, it's not a sensible thing to do, because you can group people up in multiple different ways, not just between groups of men versus groups of women, or groups of blacks versus groups of non-blacks, or various ethnic groups or races versus the other ones. But there are also other aspects that you could use to divide people into groups, such as their weight, their height, and so on and so forth. And he doesn't appear to like that, and that's his starting point. And he says that he's tends to focus on attacking left-wing ideologues because they're the ones who are dominant in universities, and that makes sense from his perspective. So he's not specifically apparently taking a pro-men line, even though attacking feminists is de facto a pro-men line. So he's a de facto pro-men theorist, even though he doesn't seem to characterize himself in that way. But there are what happens at universities is very relevant to what happens in the real world, because people who teach at universities are regarded as intelligent and knowledgeable, and I think this is perhaps less the case than it should be, and this is because of changes that are taking place in the universities to do with identity politics. But given that universities have got the reputation of producing and employing people who are highly intelligent, highly knowledgeable, this gives them a lot of influence, and the media love to run to left-wing / liberal university people in order to get a viewpoint on things which the media would then like to inculcate into the ignorant public and pound into their minds. So this makes universities very powerful from that point of view. Also, they're also powerful because they teach people, such as including media people, who end up in powerful positions. Okay, most powerful educational groups get their training at a university. I mean, it may be that some trades people, usually men, might have higher incomes than some recent university graduates, but in terms of power in society, the university graduates usually win hands down, because they deal with policy and are active in government, which is able to distribute taxpayer money according to what university educated people suggest to them is the best way of doing it. So the universities are very much part of the real world. They're not just an ivory tower. They're more like a septic tank, I would say, than an ivory tower. So men have all sorts of problems in terms of the law. For example, there are statistics, if you can find them, in some countries, which show that men are discriminated against in terms of sentencing in the courts. And then, of course, there's the issue of child custody upon divorce and separation, and I think there's for a long time there's been statistics which show that women tend to get custody more often than men do. In other words, the mothers more often than the fathers. Then there are health-related issues like longevity and the amount of spending that governments or countries generally spend on research into women's diseases as compared to research into men's diseases. There's the fact that there are disciplines called gynecology and obstetrics, whereas the discipline of andrology, which is devoted to men's health, is hardly known, let alone practiced or taught, relatively rarely. So that's one form of discrimination, you could say. So wherever you have discrimination or arguable discrimination against groups, okay, defined by some characteristic or other, you know, whether it be age or skin color or sex or gender, depending on whether it's more relevant to talk about sex or gender in that context. These are relevant because they have an effect on the real world, and of course this is why identity politics makes sense to a lot of people, is that they feel and sometimes can give good evidence that there is discrimination going on. And the point is that I'm trying to make here is that the feminists have been going on and on about income and wealth and career-related matters in terms of the differences between men and women. And Dr. Peterson, or Professor Peterson, I'm not sure if he's a professor or a doctor, has been essentially following the same line, just taking the feminist on this issue of career-related characteristics or data or statistics. Whereas if he were a men's rights activist, he might want to consider all these other aspects of society where men are arguably discriminated against, but this is not publicized, and therefore it's not well known. It's not publicized by the media because the media are basically feminist. It's not researched or publicized by the universities because the universities are basically feminist, and so on. So, and apart from, I mentioned health and I mentioned justice, there's also the area of education. There's research in various countries which seems to show that teachers discriminate against boys compared to girls in their marking, and of course there's been a lot of publicity about the fact that boys aren't doing as well as girls, or men as well as women in the education system, including higher education, and there doesn't seem to be a great deal of agreement about the reason for it, but this is partly or mostly because of the fact that this research is not very common into discrimination by teachers, and it's not very well publicized. So, and the other aspect of this, of course, is that teaching has become much more of a female occupation than it used to be. I mean, not so long ago, feminists are complaining that that girls weren't doing well at school, and so this was blamed on the boys, right? But now that boys aren't doing well at school, the media and the universities don't suddenly say, well, this must be blamed on the girls. But in fact, I think it's just as likely that you could blame it on the girl students and the female teachers as you could have originally blamed the problem with girls' education, if it was a real problem, on boys. So this is just an introduction to where I think a men's rights activist such as myself would differ from Jordan Peterson, and with any luck he might address these issues in some video or lecture in the future, if he hasn't already. I haven't seen or read everything that he's said or written.